Welcome back to Clear Channel AM 850. I'm Neil Scott. Joining us in the studio tonight, Cynthia Leeds Friedlander, one of America's leading executive coaches and career management consultants. She travels around the country working with CEOs and others in senior management, specializing in communication, career management, and corporate leadership development. Now, during her successful career, she has worked with the likes of ABC Television, Harpo Productions, Time Warner, American Express, and many other corporations and organizations. She also has a very successful private practice in New York City. Cindy is the author of an exciting new book. It's called SpeakEasy, the communication guide for career and life success, published by Wordcraft Press. In a recent Kirkus review, the reviewer writes, "In a marketplace glutted with self-help guides, how-to tomes, and handbooks for dummies and idiots, SpeakEasy rises above the cacophony of business and personal growth gurus who promise the moon to offer clear, practical, and actionable personal changes that can actually make a difference. Easily readable, visually presented, and impeccably organized, this work will provide valuable reading for any business, family, or individual. It will also help those who want to untie their tongues and avoid the hazards of miscommunication." Cindy, welcome to the program.
It's lovely to be here, Neil.
There are many communication books available. What sets SpeakEasy apart from what's already out there on this important subject?
You're absolutely right, Neil. SpeakEasy covers a lot of ground that has been covered before and is based on the tried and true. What makes SpeakEasy special is that I wanted to put this information together in a very different way than it had been put together before. I wanted to include a lot of the fundamentals in an easy access way for people so that it doesn't matter where you open that book, you're going to find something you can use and understand how to use it. I also wanted to cover some emotional, personal, psychological elements of communication because that has tremendous impact on how we communicate with each other. And I also wanted to address some very specific situations where people come to me for help most frequently, and I feel I have great expertise to help them enhance how they're interacting both at work and in their home and personal lives as well.
Who is the audience for SpeakEasy?
It is really for individuals. It is beneficial to families and particularly beneficial to the business world. I have spent most of my career doing communication coaching in the work setting. So it really is fundamentally based on the work setting. However, I made sure that I would make this book a book that would be for everyone. And that was very important to me.
Joining us tonight, Cynthia Leeds Friedlander, author of SpeakEasy, the communication guide for career and life success. You write about replacing damaging habits in communication. What are some of the most common bad communication habits that people have? And more importantly, what are some ways that people can change them?
The most common one is to use negative sentence formation rather than affirmative or positive sentence formation. The most common one that people use all the time, which is a very positive expression, is "no problem." When you think about it, that's got two negative words, one of which is problematic. So when you can express things in the affirmative rather than the negative, you will have a much better interaction with people. For example, people often will say, "that will never work." Instead of saying "that will never work," you can say, "here's what will make this successful." Or starting a sentence with "I don't think that" would be much better to start your sentence with "my opinion is." So there are lots of ways to turn negative communication into affirmative communication. And as a matter of fact, every negative statement can express exactly the same thing by turning it into an affirmative sentence.
In SpeakEasy, you write about the value of asking the open-ended questions. If you would, describe what the value is and what the reason is that you recommend that people refrain from asking the open-ended question that everybody seems to ask, why?
Let me first start with describing what an open-ended question is, because sometimes people don't understand what that is. So an open-ended question is a question that can't be answered by yes or no. So, for example, instead of saying, as so often people do when they're giving information, "do you have any questions?" So if you've explained something to someone, "do you have any questions?" they'll say, no, I understand. And if you really want to know if someone understands something, you ask an open-ended question, which is, "what questions do you have about this topic?" And then you will really get a much richer dialogue. So asking open-ended questions rather than starting questions with is, are, do, will, those are the questions that can be answered by yes or no. The one question that really has a negative impact on people is the question why. And the reason that happens is because it will sound accusatory. And if you think back on your childhood when some authority figure said, why didn't you clean up your room? Why didn't you do your homework? Why didn't you do something? Or why did you do something? It sounds more accusatory. So that's the one open-ended question that's good to leave out of your questions. And you can say instead, how did you come to that conclusion? What were the reasons you chose to do that? Now, of course, if your tone of voice is accusatory, it doesn't matter how well you ask the question.
There are two recurring themes that run throughout SpeakEasy. One of them is the theme of level communication. The second is validation. Tell us about the two themes and what it is that makes them so significant in good communication.
No matter what the level of individuals in the communication itself can always be equal. The more individuals can experience that equal two-way communication in every communication, the more enhanced their communication will be. Most of the time, we are preparing ahead, jumping ahead to our answers, and we forget to listen. So I would say listening is as important as that level communication and the validation, because quite frankly, you can't validate anyone if you haven't listened. So it's really important to start communications by demonstrating that you've heard what the other person is saying.
One of the situations you write about in SpeakEasy is networking. Now, you call this chapter Expanding the Who You Know Quotient. What makes networking so difficult for people, and how did that influence your decision to call networking, quote, R&R, research and relationships? And what's the one key tip that you can share that will change perhaps the way people feel about networking?
There's some very important fundamentals that go with networking that change the way people experience it. Because people have such a difficult time networking and feel so uncomfortable doing it, I wanted to give it a name that actually had more definition than networking and also was something that represented light and enjoyable activity like R&R. I wanted to write about it in a different way. I wanted to make sure that people saw networking as an art that is very different from the simple concept of letting everyone know you're looking for a job or letting everyone know you're looking for a new plumber. There are a lot of ways to network effectively. The reason people have such a difficult time with networking is that they feel very hat in hand. They feel like they're begging. They feel like they're coming with an empty plate. And for the most part, they do come with an empty plate. They do ask people to fix their problems rather than say, let's brainstorm together. One of the most important concepts I introduce when I talk about networking is to make sure that people think of it as brainstorming as opposed to, I'd just like to pick your brain. Picking a brain is a very graphic and very unappealing image, and people use that expression quite a lot when they're networking. So I help people understand how to brainstorm, how to come with information to get information. And I wanted to name networking something that defined it better and also was something that was more comfortable for people. So the basic concepts of good networking are research, gathering information, and relationship building. And so I called it R&R since that's rest and relaxation. I wanted to make networking something that would be appealing rather than something they're uncomfortable doing.
Cindy, you have quite a bit of wonderful praise in the front of your book, and you certainly must be very proud of what people have written about your book, SpeakEasy, the Communication Guide for Career and Life Success. I was struck by one. Bernice Smith, Director of Employee Services and Conflict Resolution for Harpo Studios, wrote, and I quote, "From beginning to end, Cindy hits on the key rules that everyone needs to know to be successful." What does she mean when she says key rules?
At the end of each chapter, I have SpeakEasy rules, and they are review and summary of the entire chapter. So Bernice is referring back to those, and I worked very hard on making those concise and clear. And they appear at the end of each chapter, and they also appear at the end of the book.
Joining us in this segment is Cynthia Leeds Friedlander. She's the author of SpeakEasy, the communication guide for career and life success. It's available at wordcraftpress.com. You can also find a copy of it available at amazon.com as well. In SpeakEasy, you talk about refusal skills, refusing the right way. What do people need to know in order to refuse in the right way?
It is very difficult for people to refuse, and people tell me all the time that they have a hard time saying no. There's some basic elements that you can incorporate into refusing a difficult request. The first one is to validate the request. You may be feeling indignant, you may be feeling angry, you may be feeling intimidated. There are lots of emotional responses you can have when people make difficult requests. If you can just listen carefully to the request and acknowledge it, let the person know you've heard their request, be respectful about it. Then, after you have done that, you can give your refusal in a very level way. No matter what the situation is, there will be an appropriate way to refuse a request without apologizing and without disclaiming. What very often happens is that people use the word but between their validation and their refusal. What they have actually done is they have erased the validation. So it's important to validate, state your refusal clearly in a level way, and make sure that you leave out the word but between your validation and your refusal.
The book is called SpeakEasy, the communication guide for career and life success, available from wordcraftpress.com. Cindy, what was the inspiration for writing this book, SpeakEasy, and what was the most important thing that you as an author learned from writing the book?
Writing SpeakEasy was certainly a labor of love. It took me 5 years to write it. One of the descriptions I like to use for myself is wordsmith. And so I wanted to be able to take that gift of wordsmithing that I have and be able to write a book that encompassed all of the elements of communication that were so important to me. Just like so many other challenges in life, getting from point A to point B is not a straight line. It was quite a roller coaster writing SpeakEasy. My passion for communication goes all the way back to when I was a little girl. I had a sister 7 years older than I who always said the wrong thing, and I was always making it my goal to help her use better communication with our parents and with other people. And so I came to call myself the wordsmith, and my dream to write a communication book has been a dream I've had throughout my career as a career coach. Years ago, I worked for an employer who told all of the consultants in our firm that they had to write an article about a topic they really cared about a whole lot. And so I decided, of course, to write my article on communication. That was going to be the launch for my book that I was going to write. And so I sat down to write that article, and I wrote 4 pages. And that was all I had to say. And so it was actually a very sad feeling for me, because I thought, well, if you only have 4 pages to write, I guess you're not going to write a book on communication. And then a number of years later, I was working on a project in Chicago for Harpo Studios. I was working with a wonderful colleague named Robin Shearer, who wrote a beautiful book called No More Blue Mondays. And I saw that book, and I got very re-inspired. One night in my kitchen, I sat down and wrote this title, SpeakEasy, and I wrote the subheadings for all of the chapters. And I think today that book and those 13 chapters and the subheadings are pretty much the same that I wrote in my kitchen that night. There were a lot of revisions. There were a lot of disappointments, and I kept at it. You asked me what it was that I learned the most, and it really was to just persevere. And if you believe in something, to continue no matter what the obstacles are. Each one of the obstacles along the way made SpeakEasy a better book. Even in this last stage of writing the book, taking it from a manuscript page to the software of the book itself. For example, I was talking about those SpeakEasy rules to you. They were all on one line on my manuscript, and they looked very crisp and very sharp. When they were transposed into the software for the book, they weren't on one line anymore because the page was a different size. And so I decided to rewrite them and make them even better. And indeed, they are much better. So every step along the way, the book got better and better.
Our guest has been Cynthia Leeds Friedlander, one of America's leading executive coaches and communication consultants. Her new book is called SpeakEasy, the communication guide for career and life success. Certain to be a bestseller. You can find out more about the book by visiting www.wordcraftpress.com. To find out more about Cindy's consulting services and leadership development programs, check out her website, www.clfconsultingservices.com. That's www.clf, as in Friedlander, consultingservices.com. I'm Neil Scott, Clear Channel AM 850. Thanks for listening.